So today is 12/12, Tuesday. The moon was in Virgo for 3 days this past weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And if you know anything about the sacred secretion, you know that that time is a special time of the month. And it's unique for each individual. Depends on when you were born. And I've only consciously tried to be aware of when that was happening in my life. Last month was the first time, and then this past weekend. And I had shared some doubts that I had going into this weekend. I'd been depressed, had a lot of things on my mind. Actually, been depressed since Thanksgiving, so I was in a very different state of mind this month, going into that time. And so on Thursday night, before I went to bed, I decided to set an intention, and I asked for a sign. Now, being raised Mormon, and maybe Christians in general, I don't know, I can't speak to that, but being raised Mormon, you're not supposed to ask God for signs. There's this whole thing in the church about it. If an investigator or anyone is asking to have a sign from God, whether or not the church is true, that means that they are a bad person, that they themselves have committed some horrible sin, and them asking God for a sign is a sign that they are not righteous or not good. I grew up with that mentality, and maybe not all Mormons feel that way. That comes directly from a story from Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was asked by a person in Nauvoo. They were having a discussion about the church, and this person, I believe it was another man, said that he wanted a sign from God that this church was true. And then Joseph accused him of being an adulterer and said if there was any person who asked for God to give them a sign that the church is true, it meant that they were an adulterer. He just made that blanket statement. And whether or not it even happened, I couldn't say, but that was the mythology that was passed down to me. And not just my parents, but in church lessons. And it made a big impression on me. You don't ask God to show you signs. Now that I've left that church and that mentality and have a whole different idea of the universe, I see nothing wrong with asking for signs. And it's strange too, because the church will tell you, the Holy Ghost will give you promptings. What is that? What is a prompting if not a sign that you're on the right path or that the church is true? So it was a contradictory thing that I grew up with, but it affected me. And I have been kind of very cautious in the way that I approached God in prayer before as a Mormon. And since I have left, that's a lot of the deprogramming and conditioning that I've had to do with thinking about Creator in a whole new way. And so Thursday night, before I went to bed, I wanted to set an intention to ask for a sign that I would recognize, a sign that would be personal to me as to whether or not I'm on the right path at the moment. And that consciously going into each month, being aware when the moon is in my sun sign, and with the intention of raising and preserving this oil, fasting, trying to live the best that I can, doing all these things. So I just said, give me a sign, show me something that I will recognize that is out of the ordinary, that I can clearly know this was an answer to my request. And so that was Friday, and then I went to bed. Thursday. That was Thursday. Friday was December 8th. That was the first day the moon was in Virgo. So it was interesting. I got my sign right at the very beginning. I was awakened at 12:08 a.m. So 8 minutes after midnight. I woke with a flash in my head, just a bright, I don't know how else to describe it. It was just a flash that jolted me awake, and then sent a shiver or a vibration all the way through my body. And I was laying on the left side of my body, and then my whole left side of my head just started tingling and pulsing, felt like it was on fire. It was a feeling I have recognized before. It's happened before. And so that flash that jolted me awake on December 8th at 12:08, and if you reduce both those things down, that reduces down to 11:11, the time 12:08 and the date 12:08. So for me, that was my sign, and it happened right at the start of the weekend. And I just remember I just laid there in bed and felt the feeling of that tingle go through me, and then the pulsing in my head, and then eventually just went back to sleep. All 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I had a slight headache on both sides of my temple, and that's not normal for me. That was an unusual thing to have a headache, and there was really no other major out of the ordinary thing, but the flash and that feeling to me was just a confirmation that don't give up. I had expressed self-doubts and doubting, with the depression that just kind of goes along with it. And to get that sign right at the beginning, just for me, put me at peace, basically. And then the rest of the weekend, I just did my best to get through it. It was kind of a hard weekend in some ways. My family had come down. The other thing I will say that happened, so my family came down to watch see the lights on Temple Square on Friday, and that was really good. But I didn't go with them, and I talked about this in a previous video. And on Sunday, my son had called. He actually got in an accident on Saturday. Well, technically Sunday, because it was after midnight, like 2 a.m. So anyways, he called to tell us about the accident, and I had a good moment of time to talk with him. And he asked about Temple Square. He didn't know that I hadn't gone. And one of the things that I will say is different that happened over the weekend, felt like a change in me, was the fact that I was able to feel my emotions, where in the past some of those emotions I would have wanted to just stuff down and repress or hide or ignore, pretend they weren't there. And my son, talking to him, this is the son that is thinking of going on a mission, and when he asked me about going to Temple Square, it immediately brought all these emotions and feelings up, and I just started to cry on the phone. And I just allowed that moment to happen. I was vulnerable with him, I was honest with him, and I was open. And what I might have done if that were to have happened a few days earlier would have been to shut down and to pretend that it didn't bother me and just use the excuse that I had, which was Emma, my daughter. I didn't want her out in the cold. I could have so easily gone that route, but I didn't. I chose to be truly vulnerable with my son in that moment and be totally open and honest with him and say, this is why I didn't go. And then I allowed that pain of it to just come out and express itself, not in an angry way, just I was deeply sad and truly hurt that, um, I can no longer participate in those things yet. I can't participate in those things yet without having hard feelings about the church, and I just didn't want to be there with them. So that was hard. And and he was so sweet. He was very, very sweet in his response to me when he saw my pain and heard my pain on the phone. Of course, he had just gotten in an accident and wrecked his car. So maybe he was being a little more, cautious of me. Anyways, because he was really vulnerable as well at that moment, having just wrecked his car. But the point is, in myself, how I felt in myself was that I was able to be open and honest and vulnerable with him in a moment that I truly might have not been that way, if not for being so focused on being spiritually present and being aware, being conscious. And so that's a moment in time that could have gone differently, maybe, if I hadn't have been working on raising the oil and being in that sacred space at that time of the month. And I truly did feel more receptive, open to inspiration, and some ideas, some things came to me that I'm going to be trying to do this week to help our home run a little smoother. We'll see. But really that was all. It was not earth-shaking or like it was last month. But there was a whole lot of things that happened last month to contribute to that. So I'm going to just keep doing what I'm doing and share. Namaste.